Conga are here today. First question off the bat is what is generative AI? Just in simplest terms, so we can kind of start from there.
It's a good question, Colin. I think the way that now I'm about as far from technical on this as you can imagine, but the way it's been described to me is that it's simply mathematics, right? It is mathematical statistical averages between words, and when they're strung together, what the context might be. That's a really tough concept for us to wrap our heads around because we're not a machine that's learning that context, but I would equate it to essentially learning to read, right? It's very much like that. Grant, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, my take on it, I mean, generative AI is really sort of specifically talking to the class of AI that instead of necessarily doing a refined task, actually generates content, and it sort of creates answers from its understanding of language, understanding of concepts, and how the language surrounds those concepts. And it can actually sort of drive its own conclusions and generate content or feedback. So, most of the AI I've been involved in my career up until this point has been, either search oriented or concept identification oriented or sort of driving specific analytic observations. Generative AI, on the other, is a little bit newer concept that's sort of driving or deriving sort of net new sort of human style generated content or response. And so it's interesting because it's very different in that way.
So I think by this point, most people have used ChatGPT 3 or 4 or some version of it, right? And We've been wildly impressed with some of its capabilities. What have you heard about like horror stories? Like where do you think we are?
Yeah,
really.
It's a great question, Colin. I think, the first thing I'd say is, there's been plenty of public information that's been released about folks who have used this inappropriately in a legal context and have subsequently faced the repercussions of that. But what I think is more telling is, this is not something that we have just started working on. We've been working on this for a while. And what we have found is that we don't necessarily think that the value add of a generative AI has anything to do with its ability to create a contract on its own without any oversight. So I think, and I'll let Grant kind of finish here, but I think essentially what we've discovered is that it's best used as an accelerator. It's not necessarily to own things entirely.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good answer, Josh. A little bit different, just a little extra color on that from my perspective. Maybe I'll start outside of the realm specifically of just CLM, but generative AI, it knows a lot. I mean, it's based on these massively, multiple hundreds of billions of provisions in sort of correlated language models. So, it has access to huge amounts of information and knowledge, and it's actually pretty conceptually smart. The problem is it's not a trained professional. It doesn't know, it knows more about structure and more about how to correlate and create a really good human answer than it knows about accuracy. And so I think the horror stories are, I think maybe many of us have experienced them, but the horror stories are, it writes an amazing sort of sensible, very compelling piece of news, whether it's a contract or a poem or whatever, it'll come up with 3 great points. And then it'll just make one up for fun in order to make the structure work, in order to make, like a good structured sort of expository paper has 4 points that are supporting the hypothesis. If it finds 3, it might make up a 4th one. It doesn't actually know the difference, perfectly between right and wrong. And it doesn't have an ethical obligation like you might as a lawyer or someone might as a doctor. So I think the problem is it's a little bit like a know-it-all teenager. It knows a lot, but it doesn't necessarily have enough experience to know what it doesn't know. And so it'll throw you a curveball here and there, and those curveballs can be dangerous. So, we've all seen the news about the extreme cases where somebody writes a motion to the court and cites legal research. 2 of the citations are correct, and the 3rd one is totally fabricated. Or it may make a medical diagnosis. If it's not supervised, it can be pretty dangerous. If it is supervised, it can be incredibly helpful. So maybe my horror story is when you don't pay attention, and when you don't pay attention and you let it go a little too far, there's the danger zone.
For sure.
There's so many expectations, right, on what it does do, what doesn't it do, right? And Josh, like, love your input on this as well. Like, how would you define what it does do for someone kind of picking it up right now versus doesn't do?
Yeah, we did a ton of research on this, so maybe I'll let Josh sort of give you the summary of that research.
Yeah, sure. So Conga has spent, the better part of the last 8 months doing a lot of research on this, talking to the AI vendors. We sent a team to EMEA to meet with our customers in Europe to discuss their nuances and considerations. And we did focus group studies with decision makers in the legal space, because we want to make a very concerted effort and a very responsible one as we approach this, right? So what we have found is that most attorneys and most legal departments are not looking at ChatGPT to sit and write contracts for them and do so unsupervised. What we found in the expectation is that they really want it to behave like 3-year, third-year law student or third-year, corporate attorney. They want it to be able to make accurate extractions of information, to be able to make correlations and provide assessments. But ultimately, the final decision is on the senior level attorney, right? But the pace is so incredible. It's so much faster than what it would take, one human to do some sort of research project through many different documents in a repository to make a decision on an amendment, right? As an example. It can surface that information so much faster and make a judgment call based on so many more pieces of data that it's really going to become something, we've talked a lot about this. Will AI replace lawyers? Absolutely not. But lawyers who adopt AI will replace lawyers who do not, right? The speed and the power of that aggregation capability is unmatched. It's just not, it doesn't exist today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. If you really get to the core of it, I took a bit of a sort of reserve position initially. I mean, when everybody was diving in and making market announcements for technology that I don't think they had yet, we had instead went out and really looked at what the market wanted, where that we'd create value, where we thought the risks were. And, honestly, I also, worked at LexisNexis driving non-legal research product development for 7 years. So I had a bit of, 12 years at DocuSign. I had a bit of a bead on, what legal professionals might and might not benefit from and where the risks might be. And really what it comes down to is this is a fantastic brainstorming partner. We all can really use, like we all keep people around us that are great ideators, that have, insights that we might not be seeing, that may have huge catalogs of, data, knowledge, experience. Again, I do think that, that generative AI, particularly ChatGPT-4, where I'm most familiar, it's like it's like a genius level teenager. It knows a lot, but it doesn't have judgment. It doesn't have judgment. So, I think if you take from it the value of its ideas, if you take from its, like the insight, the brainstorming insights, and you understand that it's going to get some of it wrong, it can really make a difference for you. It can, it can tell you what it thinks is different between this contract and that contract. It can tell you what it thinks somebody might be trying to accomplish with a particular sort of clause in a negotiation. It can tell you how this contract might be different than 2,000 others, which is pretty difficult to do as a human. It might not get it exactly right, but it will get some of it right. And that can be a huge advantage. And so, I really think the value and the promise here is that it can do things on a scale people can't.
Yeah.
Can't necessarily do it right, but it can give you some really strong leads to follow. And that's where I think the state of the value is right now.
Yeah.
It has access to thousands or millions of documents where a person can't work at that scale.
Yeah.
Just don't expect it to get it exactly right.
So let's jump into about like its capabilities. Like what level of pre-work is needed for implementing as a CLM with these AI capabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question, Colin. And I'm really glad you asked that, because the number one thing that we've been stressing is that a good generative AI strategy starts with a good extraction AI strategy. You cannot put garbage in and expect to get pearls out. You're going to get garbage back out, right? So in order to build a repository of the right kind of information with the right tracking of clauses and data points that matter to you and your contracts, once you have that in place, it really expands the power of the AI, of the capabilities, right? Because now I can do things like find, let's say I'm working on a large contract for a manufacturing client, right? I can go and say, find all of my contracts for manufacturing clients and please contrast and compare this limitation of liability clause against the others. Tell me the differences and the similarities, right? These are the kind of things that you can do. And this would take hours of someone's time, right? To go and hunt through things, to find precedents, to find an amendment that they need to use to help draft a new contract, right? And that's just one example of the speed and the power that it can bring. I think ultimately where we want to go is that it's not just about making it a good conversational interface for a contract. It's about revenue intelligence, right? It's about being able to find out information about contracts from really anyone in the business that needs it, right? If your fulfillment team needs to know what kind of obligations they have to fulfill, why not let them find out from the tool? So I think there's a lot to come. Grant, some thoughts there?
Yeah, I'll take a different approach to it, just to kind of create, in case, to try and create as much understanding as possible. I think there's 3 ingredients, just taking a bit of a sort of a high level, simple view of it. There's 3 ingredients to being successful here. The first ingredient, I think everyone has access to if they're so inclined, and that would be to take one of these really sort of massively provisioned large language models. You'll hear them referred to as LLMs. Pardon me. ChatGPT 4 is one. ChatGPT 3.5 was a predecessor. There's the Google, contract model. There's a bunch.
Yeah.
I think the best known one is ChatGPT at this point. That large language model is what has trained this generative technology to understand the constructs of human language. And so that's the first ingredient. It's sort of available to all of us. The second ingredient is having high quality data of your own, because I doubt anybody's interested in like probing the collective of everything that's in ChatGPT. They're interested in how that might apply to their specific domain content. So you have to have the content that you want to use the LLM to understand. And so that's where having, an organized, implemented history in a CLM can make a big difference. If you're going beyond that, having also your quotes or your invoices, or your configurations or your bills, or, your renewals or your opportunities, all the data that can be brought into that sort of cleanly into that arena will be important. And that's when Josh talked about extraction. I mean, you've got those. ChatGPT can tell you nothing about the boxes of contracts you have in boxes. So yeah, if you can get those contracts in, then ChatGPT can apply its intelligence to tell you lots of things about those contracts. And then I think the third ingredient is really kind of on your vendor or on you, should you choose to take it on directly. And that is prompt engineering. And what prompt engineering is sort of really doing the work to figure out how to ask the question with the correct prompts in the question in order to get the most consistent and accurate answer. And that's sort of, frankly, for those of us that have the benefit of having lots of customer data to work with, the next thing that we focus on is sort of getting the prompt engineering ironed out so that we can actually ask questions, like make it easy for you to ask a question in a way that we can translate through our prompt engineering into an accurate and complete sort of rational answer. So, we'll show you a demo a little bit later and you'll see how that kind of is applied.
Yep.
So I think, you have to kind of get all 3 into sync.
Yep.
And then you can get great outcome.
Agree. That's really well said, Grant. I think that's about as good as we can say it, I think, in terms of the success. I think the one last piece I would say before we move on, Colin, is just, I think it's pretty apparent, but, don't put these things into the public model, right? Don't go into ChatGPT's public login and drop your contract in, right? We have 6
At some point, Colin, you should probably ask a what are the cautions question, and we'll go through those, because there are a lot.
There's quite a few. Yeah, that's fair.
I can tell you a cautionary tale, when we're ready for it.
So let's hit limitations first, right? We see the strengths of it, right? We see look, leveraging these large language models to get where you need.
Why don't I lead on this one, Josh? You can get behind me on it. The number one limitation is it can't answer a question for which you don't have the data to answer the question. So ultimately, data is the key. There's a lot. I mean, there's frankly just too much data in those LLMs in the first place. But if you want to get specific, you have to have a private model to apply the intelligence to. That private model, having your data, having your specific content sort of in an appropriate taxonomy where the key terms and content are sort of properly and consistently reflected, will make it possible for this thing to answer a great question. So I mean, what it can do is it can work with the data you have. What it can't do is it can't work with the data you don't have. So really, at the end of the day, that's kind of the big limitation.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing more and more like companies that are just using their own data, right? So how does somebody practically go about feeding the right data in to get the right information out, right? Like if you like somebody like Conger, right? You're seeing the whole life cycle to begin, where you're seeing everything from sales all the way pushed to the very end of execution of the contract and everything in between. Not like every other kind of CLM provider out there to begin with, right? Not hitting on any of them, but you're kind of seeing, the CPQ stuff.
Right.
Like,
we're seeing the full revenue life cycle. So we see the front and the back of a contract, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, I'm pretty straightforward about this. I don't think anybody that does a good job of prompt engineering and has reasonable data is at a major advantage or disadvantage. I think this is a fairly democratic terrain from my perspective. Where I think where you can provide more value is when you happen to have access to more well-structured data. So, if you're a contract lifecycle product, you have a decent data set and you've done a good job of organizing that data and you do your work to do prompt engineering, you can answer questions about contracts pretty well. If you want to though answer questions about how that might reflect, correspond to an order, or if you want to understand how that might affect, how a breach of a particular obligation in a contract might affect a renewal, you can't possibly do that if you don't have the order information and you don't have the renewal information around the opportunity. So if you want to know, what are the unpaid items in a particular invoice and how do they relate to obligations that were in the contract, and did they derive from a quote that was actually put into the contract as an addendum, and how that might affect somebody's potential to churn, good damn luck if you don't have all the content to make that assessment. So, I do think that having having that richness of content makes a big difference for what value you can provide.
Sure. Anything to add, Josh?
Couldn't say it better.
Well, let me ask this question, right? And you've kind of you hit on it already. So, like, AI is definitely taking tasks, but it's not really taking people yet, right? Taking people's jobs. Is there a fear that it will eventually catch up, like the more you kind of train it and learn?
Of course.
Because, like with the prompt engineering, you're seeing like workflows, automating functions of a job, right? Is there, from your perspective and like what you're talking with customers, what are you seeing, like where this is going?
Yeah, we still need humans to make decisions. If anything, this is an accelerant to a team, right? This gives a team even more bandwidth, right? I think the notion of technology will replace is a fair one to be afraid of. But from everything we've seen so far, it really just speeds up the existing team and really kind of, it feels so natural once you start using it. And I've done so many demos now, it just feels so normal, right, to use. I think definitely it's fair to say that there should be caution, but I think at the same time, we're so far away from it, Colin. It can't make decisions on its own.
I challenge you on that, though. Are we so far if it's moving so fast?
Mm-hmm. Well, if it was moving any faster, I think we would see a lot more vendors already have it published. We see a lot of our competitors in the space with waiting lists, and there's a reason for that, right? There's a trust component that's just not there yet, Colin, I think. And I hear you. And I see it. It can write code, right? It can write code. There's a lot of groups that are nervous about what can happen here, but right now it still can't be trusted. 2 years from now, maybe we have a different conversation, Colin, but I don't think so. But Grant's probably he's seen this for a long time.
Well, I'm a lot older than most, so I'm going to shy away from
dirt. Like when they called that when they were like, "Hey, we found dirt."
Dirt was rock when I met it, but at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know how soon we would see something like that happen. So I'm not going to speculate a ton. I will say I'm pretty confident in two things. One, I'm pretty confident that this will change the mix of skills that are applied to a problem.
Yes.
I don't see it at this point, at this exact moment in time or anytime in the next 12 to 24 months. I don't see it becoming the decision maker, it's not licensed to practice law, and I don't see that changing very quickly. What I do think, though, is it's a pretty good researcher. It's a pretty good clerk. It can do a solid job of doing a heavy lift, and so. But I don't personally predict what I think is going to happen is it's going to change the expectations for how the standard of work we do. Right. I mean, whereas, like going back into my past a bit, it might have been possible to do sort of case law research on 10 or 20 precedents, in the past before you actually formed a strategy for a particular motion. Now you could look at thousands. It changes the scale of what's possible. And I think what that's going to actually do is it's going to increase the expectation of the standard of the work. And so rather than the standard staying equal and everyone basically, it's going to change the labor mix. It's going to change the expectation. It's probably going to change the outcome. But I've seen innovations. I've been hearing, fourth GLs, blockchain, automatic code generation, toolkits that are built. I haven't seen any of them reduce the amount of work that got done or the number of people that do it. What I've seen them just create whole industries, create growth on the top side of expectations. And so I predict more of that's going to happen. I do predict we're all going to get pressure to find ways where this can save money and allow us to spend less. I caution against that right now. I think there are some problems that can come up with that. Like, if you depend on this too much, if you wind up changing your resourcing, and then say an intellectual property suit lands and a bunch of the LLM gets carved back because of IP violations, that could actually be a problem. So, bottom line is I think it's going to just change what's possible. I don't know that it's going to really cost. I will say that I might feel differently in sort of simpler jobs, but in the legal space, I think it's just going to raise expectations. I also think it's going to make it possible to just do more. And when you can do more and you create more value and we get these more holistic sort of insights, companies are going to figure out how to use this as an advantage in doing business, which will actually create more demand, not less. So I'm not so pessimistic. I'm not on the Luddite side of this equation where I think it's going to put a bunch of people out of work. But I definitely think it's a little bit like, when automated tools were created to make furniture. Using those tools makes you faster. It makes you more consistent. It doesn't reduce the need to do the job, though. So, just using good tools tends to just raise the pace.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So but will that change in 3 to 5 years? It could. I'm not prepared to say it won't.
Yeah.
I don't think we're at the eve of anything like that happening in the next 1 to 2, but I think it is a foreseeable future where this stuff can make better decisions than it does today. I wouldn't rule it out.
I was reading something early this morning that, Einstein had an IQ of 160. The average human's walking around like at an IQ of 100, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure legal ops is up there a lot higher, but it's like, but ChatGPT itself right now is like at 150 IQ.
Yeah.
Like, as you said, like a teenager, thinking like a teenager.
Yeah, with a giant catalog of knowledge.
A giant catalog of knowledge, right?
All of human history up to 2021.
Training
geez.
itself, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's going to get exponentially.
Anybody that's betting against more transformation is probably betting badly.
Yeah.
I think this is a change that's going to accelerate, but at the moment, I think the smart money is to master the utilization of this tool in order to make you more effective at what you do, and then we're going to roll through it together. But I don't see, I think the domains that are going to change least quickly are serious professional domains. Medical space, nobody's ready to let AI practice medicine, but my gosh, it's a pretty good diagnostician.
Wow. So from a practical standpoint, Grant and Josh, like, would you say, like, it's definitely a teacher, right? It's going to help you. It can be an assistant to you. How else do you guys see it, like, working with folks like that are in-house, sitting in the pocket, looking at their tech stacks, like, using it as a function to get better and better?
Yeah. So it's like, think about today, right? A contract dispute or an ongoing negotiation is now escalated to the GC level, right? The GC hasn't had a chance to review this. So what needs to happen now, right? The attorney that's working it and the team working it needs to provide some kind of summary. They need to highlight the changes. They need to point at certain things that are risky in the contract. They need to get the GC up to speed. That takes man hours, that takes time, that takes coordination, meetings, right? It's all about the time component, right? Because what happens in the future, which I will show you here in a second, is that GC can just go in and get a prompt that's pre-baked for the GC that highlights what they care about, right? So instead of having to get their whole team together, they can get a pre-read in and get it done in a few minutes and then start working with the team if necessary, or they can start working the contract. And this is applicable to more than just, say, drafting a net new. This is talking about what are considerations if there's a chain of amendments do I need to have if we're going to amend it, right? There's all these different levels of consideration and that research that need to go on. And I think that's where we're going to see the vast majority of that, Colin. Yeah.
Yeah. Love it.
So I'd predict, let me just be super specific. I'd predict three things. One, I think this is fundamentally going to help everyone get their contract material under management. I think when applied properly with the right sort of backing technical tool, it's going to be possible to bring sort of contracts and material under management that's beyond you right now. That's either in boxes or it's sitting in a legacy. It has to be gone through by hand. So, I think most of us don't have all of our possible content available. This will help us get that done. Second major thing I think it does is I think it's going to absolutely fundamentally change the process for electronic discovery. I mean, I was in that industry for a while, going through and doing, sort of and it's not necessarily just contracts. We could talk about email or files or anything else, doing a responsiveness review and doing a production associated for demand discovery. That had to be done by people before. And I think that this technology can do that pretty well, and really get that first round of review done, much more expeditiously. And I think the third thing it's going to do is it's going to allow us to design and find our best content that actually is most effective. It can do things like clause analysis across a whole plethora of contracts, helping you like build your proper clause library or figure out sort of risks between, a variant, and frankly, help you understand how to deal with third-party paper when you're sort of pushed into using someone else's contract when you prefer not to. I mean, it can do a lot of that lift for you. So I think those three things are going to change now.
Okay. Love it. I love the predictions.
I'll go with that for the moment. My guess is those all change a ton.
Yeah. Well, I want to give a shout out to Cindy. Thanks for sharing. That's an awesome use case. If there's anybody else there, we'd love to hear kind of feedback what you're doing. If you're using prompt engineering or anything else, we'd love to hear about it in the chat.
Well, do you think it'd be a good time to show everybody, and then we can probably spur on some conversation from showing them a quick demonstration?
Before we do that, can I ask you one more question?
Of course.
So this will tee it up. How is Conga different than other CLM vendors who say to have AI?
Okay.
Data.
Yeah.
Honestly, data and a decade of experience. But we have more than just contract data, and we can actually bring them to bear. But let's let Josh show you. I think a demo's worth lots of words.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right, everybody. So we're going to do a live demo today. So hang on tight with me. This is in our development environment. What are you looking at here? Well, you're looking at a conversational interface where I've uploaded a contract it's a sample contract, and I'm going to do a couple of canned prompts here to show you just some of the power. But, first we'll talk about some of the things we're doing right away. Some of the things we're doing right away is we're automatically summarizing this contract in a little brief here. This gives, a bunch of key information that, I care about and is fully customizable. If I wanted to make this summary a little different based on what I care about, I can change the default prompt to get a different summary, right? All this is just prompt engineering. We're literally telling it to put it into a bulleted list and to highlight certain things with bold, right? It's all just instruction-based prompting to get it to do what you want it to do. So let's ask it a few questions and see how it does. All right, so let's see what kind of obligations Gold Star will be entering into with Acme in this master consulting agreement that they are, as the consultant, going to be participating in. So what we're simulating here is just a quick ability to say, I want to just really quickly summarize what I'm agreeing to or what the counterparty is agreeing to here in this agreement, so I can get a baseline for how I want to negotiate, right? And we're doing a little bit of a 1980s synthweave, scroll over here. I really want to put this in like a graphic and have it play some really nice 80s synthweave while it's going. But as you can see, it's churning through everything in this contract to come up with all of the obligations that are contained within. So once it's done going through, and finding all those obligations, it's going to format that list for me into something that's readable. And then what I can do is I can just go through and I can start reading the different obligations that, Gold Star is going to owe Acme here in this contract. Right. So then I want to know a couple things. Well, I'm really concerned about limitation of liability when it comes to consulting contracts. They can be somewhat obtuse. So I'm going to ask it to summarize that for me. So contract have a limitation of liability clause. Is it capped? Suggest a red line to reduce risk for Acme. Justify the response. Now, why did I highlight that when I said it? Because what we have learned through all of our testing and trials is that if you want to understand why ChatGPT has made any sort of suggestion, all you have to do is ask it, right? And so what we've done here is we've asked it to identify a limitation of liability clause. We have asked it to identify if there is a cap. And then we said, please provide us some kind of red line that reduces risk to Acme. Now, this is ChatGPT's thoughts on how to reduce risk. And I'm going to show you something a little different in just a second. But as you can see, it's given me the current text. It's given me the red line. And then it's justified. It's changed so that I can understand why it has made that change. Now, I am not a lawyer. I don't know if that justification is perfect or not. But I don't necessarily care, because what I actually care more about is not necessarily what ChatGPT thinks about my red line. I want to know what we think about my red line. Well, how do I do that? Well, first, let's extract all of the clauses and data from this document. Right. And so what I've just done is I've asked it to go through and I've asked it to identify what we're calling topics. Right. And what it's done is it's found all of the topics in this and it's put them all into a nice table for me to review the clauses individually. Why did we do that? Because in my playbook, I have all this different information about how I want to handle a red line to specific clauses like confidential information, governing law, and limitation of liability. All of this information needs to be used by an attorney when they are looking at a red line to make a decision on how to counter, right? Well, I could do this by manually flipping back and forth between my playbook and coming up with ideas on my own. Or I can use a comparison tool to look at my playbook and determine the best version of the red line that I should make based on my playbook information, not based on what ChatGPT thinks. So what are you looking at here? Well, we actually are showing you both sides of this agreement, right? The first party and the counterparty. And we're showing you the original text. And then we're going to show you the change text here based on your clause library. Now, this doesn't look like a strike through yet. We're working on this. ChatGPT is actually so darn smart, when it writes back to you and it makes a red line, it will reuse characters from deleted text. So as you can imagine, that doesn't look great in a strike through, but we're working on making a nice graphical representation of that. So here is what I'm being told I should do to make this more in compliant with my playbook. And then yet again, right? Here is my justification explaining why we're making that suggested change, right? And this is what we're talking about when we say some kind of aggregation service, right? The ability to very quickly handle incoming requests, red lines, and other feedback about a contract, and then to very quickly be able to make a decision that is informed from your playbook, right? I keep stressing that point because it's very important. So it looks like we got a couple of questions coming in, which is kind of what we expected. Colin, do you want to curate? How do you want to handle this, my friend? Oh, are you muted?
Okay. There's Jason Smith. So Cindy asked, how does the extraction work if the effective date is based on the last date of signature? How does the extraction work if the effective date or other information is handwritten? Can it decipher handwriting?
That's a really good question, Cindy, and this is actually a really important point that we want to make here, right? Is I don't actually know about the handwriting just yet, but what we've seen is that it's fine at handling OCR PDFs, which is where you would mostly find the handwriting.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll tell you how we're approaching that. I don't know how ChatGPT by itself might or might not approach it. My suspicion is it doesn't, but that's why we're not solely doing ChatGPT. So, that's where we rely on our contract intelligence product, which actually can ingest this paper or can do OCR if there's handwritten or non-text documents as a source. Then we basically do an immediate term recognition using our extractive AI, and then we bring that into the ChatGPT context. So the handwritten signature would basically be recognized as a signature at that point. So we would be able to calculate it. Now, this is where generative is interesting and comes in. It's very good at associative reasoning. So, one of the things that's very hard to do for sure for us, and I think pretty much everyone in the past, was, sort of referential logic, where you're saying, if the termination date, is if there hasn't been a particular activity within a certain number of days after a particular event, that's pretty difficult to deal with. That's where LLMs have advanced us. They understand that kind of subtlety better. So when you apply the two technologies together, the ability to sort of like ingest and translate to a digital asset, the contract, now you have the data, and then you apply the intelligence of generative, you can actually do both. So, that's essentially one of the more, that and the ability to sort of decipher and deal with complexity in things like tables of obligations or tables of SKUs. These are some of the real big enhancements is that you can deal with that level of computational sort of subtlety. So honestly, I think we can answer, that's one of the differences is we could actually correctly compute the termination date under that circumstance because we can recognize the events and do the associative math.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's right. There's the win right there.
Yeah. And then I think the key point I wanted to highlight is once that information has been extracted, one of the things that, we think about at Conga is we want to write that information back to a record in a database, because now we can do even more with that information once it's in a database format. And I just saw Gary ask a similar question, so perfect timing. But I think Justine had a question, Colin. Do we want to jump on that one?
Yeah, Justine asked, what is the typical adoption timeline for using Gen AI on a team? For instance, a team that is used to printing out documents to highlight, etc. Is it difficult from a change management perspective? Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Justine. Good question.
I'll jive on this one. I'm going to put on my old solution architect, former consulting hat, and just say, generally speaking, every adoption event can be challenging, but every adoption event works the exact same way. To get adoption, you get buy-in. To get buy-in, you find out what problems you need to solve, and you present how you're going to solve those problems to the users that need to buy in, right? It's always about what's in it for me, right? And so if you can show accurately what's in it for me by giving them an example, by showing them how it works, by using it with the superstar in the organization and say, look at how Colin's doing using this, right? These are all ways that we can increase adoption. I think it's a standard, it's a fair question, Justine, but I think the answer is follow the same steps that are kind of best practices for tech adoption.
And I'm just going to be a wet blanket and say, I don't think anybody knows yet what the typical adoption experience and timeline would be, because we're at the advent of this. Now, we could tell you for CLM in general, but you probably need to ask me in about 6 to 12 months on generative, because it's new for all of us. We're just now launching our products around generative. I think most of the people in the CLM industry have been talking about them for a year, but are also launching their products. So I just don't think as an industry we know yet. But we're definitely going to learn. Josh is right for sure that it's a change management process. It's pretty straightforward in terms of its typical change management, but change is never easy. So
always hard.
Thank you, Justine. Great question. Gary Wheeler, are you able to look at the metadata stored on the contract record in addition to what you extract from the contract itself?
Yeah, you saw my big silly broom mustache smile there, because absolutely. So one of the things that we've been piloting and working on at Conga that's part of this process is the way that it communicates. It uses a thing called a vector database. And we've been working on storing vectors in that database from typical databases so we can review that metadata. Sorry, that was very technical. The answer to the question is absolutely, Gary. We want to make sure that honestly, Gary, when we do a full repository search, I can tell you that we're not going to start by searching through every document text. We're going to start with a metadata search to make it more relevant, and because of cost savings, right? One thing that we haven't talked about is how many tokens are being used when we're doing this, right? And one of the things we're working on before we take it to the market is making sure that we're being very cost effective with how we're leveraging the AI tokens, right? A standard prompt that you saw me do a second ago takes anywhere from 5 to 10 tokens. But if I need to review an entire 100-page document, our token count's going to go way up, right? So being able to review that information, that the metadata is critical to what our pathway is for giving you all a product that is both responsible from a cost perspective, but also very useful.
So, Grant, let me just jump in on a quick question myself. If anybody else, first of all, if you have any more questions on the demo or any of the presentation today, just jump in and ask a question. My question is, where do we go from here? Like you said, like no data, no key, right? So more data, more key. It looks like, you know, I'm familiar with Conga, right? I've used it for over 10 years, 3 different companies. I've seen the whole revenue life cycle and the whole journey through. For me, it's a no-brainer to actually like use ChatGPT or some form of AI to get those answers and questions.
Yeah.
Is it a race to more data for all our companies? Like, what's your perspective on that?
I think it should be, but I mean, I don't know. I try not to make too many arrogant statements, but if it is, I think we might be winning that one. But I think what comes next is everyone's going to start launching these kinds of capabilities. I think it's a pretty safe bet that most of the serious vendors are going to launch these kinds of capabilities. I think some of us will have a wider data perspective. Some will have a more narrow data perspective. I'll tell you what we're doing and what we've already done first is that the very first thing that this has made a big difference in is just implementation timelines. If you want to go through 1,000 contracts and figure out, or 10,000 contracts and figure out what your key clause library should look like, this accelerates that process and lowers the cost of implementation considerably. So I think most of us are using these technologies already, even outside of our core products. And so, that's what's first. I'm pretty sure everyone's probably doing some level of that. I mean, our IT department broke this first. I mean, they took all of our internal product documentation, all of our APIs, all of our go-to-market material, everything in the website, and they threw it in one of these internal or sort of the private LLMs. It's one of our best internal customer service reps right now. I mean, Josh himself on his teams has a little tagline that says, please ask ChatGPT first. So like, that's the first step in the journey for lots of people.
Yeah.
But we're all launching product right now. So, early adopters are going to generate the first experience, and we'll understand change management, and we're all going on this journey together. But I don't think this journey is going to be over for quite a long time. I think there's a lot of innovations possible. And I think, we're pretty siloed right now as a world. I mean, like CLM is very separate from quoting, is very separate from renewals, is very separate from billing. And I don't think that's the reality of the world. I think the reality of the world is these things integrate in order to create a digital experience for customers. Yep. So that's the race I'm going to run.
Yep. Colin, I'll tell you what, if we want to talk about getting started, we'll help. So we're going to launch an early adopter program of what you just saw in a demonstration and around the June to July timeframe. And what I'd like to do today is I'd like to extend the offer to legal operators members to join us in that early adopter program. You're more than welcome to jump on the phone with me. We'll upload a contract and run through it together so you can see the power and you can ask it questions about your business and your contract.
Okay. Thanks, Josh. Another question comes in from Kathleen Gilbert. Can the results that you generate from the Conga be exported in a friendly, easy to understand formatting? Are the results captured for future reference, or do you have to resubmit?
Great questions, Kathleen. Let me answer the first question. Absolutely. So what I did today was very basic formatting, but we can ask it to put things into tables. We can ask it to bold or to highlight certain things to make it a lot more readable. And the second one you asked was captured for future reference. So what we haven't built yet is some sort of chat history. What we would like to do is make sure that a history is contained with each document so that a user can access previous prompts. We think that that's a pretty straightforward way to make sure to keep that history and provide that value.
I mean, and frankly, formatting and the UI aspects of it are the part we're working on right now.
That's right.
That's sort of where we're at, in our development process. We've got the functionality really where we want it, and now we're working on really making the presentation ideal. And honestly, you're all going to be part of that experience, right? I mean, we will get informed as people. This is new terrain for everyone.
Yeah.
So we will learn together what the best way to present is.
Yep.
This is, like I say, it's a journey. I think there's going to be a lot of evolution here.
Yeah, and we're going to go on it together as an industry. I mean, we're going.
Another question for you guys. Some of the issues that I've had doing implementations. I'm sure AI is assisting in workflows. Are you guys there yet? Are you kind of thinking about that?
Yeah, let me jump on that too. So I'm throw back on my architect hat. So I have also a purveyor of CLM implementations. I've experienced quite a few myself. And what I would say, the thing that always slowed down implementation was I would have this lovely conversation with the legal team. Hey, I'm going to be on site in 2 weeks. If you could have your templates organized and ready to go, I can get them in the tool the day that I'm there. But if they're not, it's going to take some time, right? How many times do you think I showed up on site with prepared templates? And I'm not blaming anybody because I get it, right? One of the things that I didn't show you today that we're working on, but it's already in the tool, is the ability to construct templates from a variety of sources, right? Give me all of my manufacturing contracts. I want a specific set of language for that. Okay, let's do that, right? That's the kind of power that it can create, is the simplification of templates. Now, what you said about being able to design workflows is absolutely coming, right? We've already seen that it can write code. What we've seen is I can actually tell it to extract obligations, format it into JSON, which is how things communicate over APIs, and I could send that package of deliverables to a billing system or maybe to a fulfillment system, whatever it might be, right? So I think that's really, really where we're headed, and kind of what to think about, right? Is what are the values add that it's going to bring later, right? There's so much going on with this thing right now.
I think the value is going to be there. I mean, that's one of the major pieces of feedback we get in any new CLM implementation is the implementation is complicated and takes a lot of time. I think the number one immediate value we're going to get is we're going to be able to shorten that. And we're going to be able to do a better job of it by using these tools. So, I think that's one of the most accessible value propositions.
Absolutely, yeah. I think putting a framework together like that could be more kind of plug and play using, the skill set of AI.
Yeah, faster implementation, cheaper implementation, better implementation.
We got somebody who knows a little bit about Conga with a question here. Srinivas, that is a integration to ChatGPT, but yes, that will be wrapped under our Conga Contract Intelligence offering. Obviously, you can reach out to us to find out more, especially if anyone here is a customer. If you'd like to know more about what we're working on, I'd be more than happy to sit down with you and walk through it. Whoever, right? I'm happy to talk to you. But yes, this will be a part of that extended part of that offering.
Also, Gary has another question.
Boy, Gary, keep them coming.
Gary's knocking it out of the park today.
Good job,
Gary. Any research in progress for mature companies on extracting KPI and key data and using to make better business decisions? Seems like high value to me. If you have any other data, I rarely see companies mature enough. Grant.
Softball, Gary. I appreciate that. Nice big lob. Experience? No. But that is exactly what we're focused on, right? I mean, with the opportunity to understand what's coming out of contracts and correlate that to what went into the orders or orders or the configurations that might have actually preceded the contract, and then how that actually correlates through to the bills and potential future renewable opportunities. That is exactly the gold in the hills that we're trying to extract, which is, how do you understand how what somebody bought correlates to what you're obligated to deliver, to what you actually delivered and the revenue that was recognized, and what does that tell you about what you should be configuring and selling? What does that tell you about what will renew or churn? What does that tell you about what might actually be something you can upsell, cross-sell early? And what does that tell you about how your risks, which are typically thought of as legal risks, correlate to financial risks and opportunities? That is the difference right there. So, I don't have a lot of experience with that yet because we're working on it. We haven't really delivered it yet, but that's the vision, and that is the opportunity.
We're actually working on it internally with our legal team, right?
Hopefully in 6 months, I can show you some success stories.
Yeah. And hopefully it's our legal team, right? They're our first customer of this product. So
I'm far, I think that's really the difference. I mean, that's the quantum here. That's where you can really move into the next level, is when you can actually look at this holistically.
But guys, this has been fascinating, great discussion. Thank you so much for answering all these questions and knocking them out of the park. I will be sharing your email information if you're okay with it.
Okay. Absolutely.
I want to thank all the attendees for spending your time with us today. Really, really appreciate it. Feel free to follow up with both Josh and Grant if you have any questions. I'll be following up with a copy of the recording and their email addresses. And stay safe out there, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
We'll see you guys this year at Legal Operators. And if you try hard enough, we might be able to convince Grant to go, Colin. You just got to work him a little bit.
All you got to do is invite me.
I've been inviting you. See you all soon.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.